Hey, welcome to this episode of Think Business Live. Looking forward to talking with Chris Mirabile. Chris, it's great to connect with you. NOVOSLabs.com, your company. Novos, we're going to talk all about Today Think community on something we don't talk about. I don't think I've ever had a show in almost 1,500 shows that's been dedicated to this, which is kind of great. We're going to talk about how we can control aging. And we're going to talk about how it's 90% lifestyle and it's 10% genetic, which I think many people would probably think it's the opposite, which we talked about briefly, and how we can actually control aging. So CEO and founder of NOVOS is here, Chris Mirabile. Chris, welcome to the show. So let's start there. How do we control aging today?
Well, thanks for having me, John. It's a very broad question, and it's an incredibly complex topic. So there are very high-tech solutions that are being developed by scientists at biotechs and in academics. And then there are the low-tech ways, so to speak, the things that we can do now, everything from our lifestyles, from sleep to stress management to diet, activity, supplementation, and so on. And so we, as a company, NOVOS, we specialize in the quote unquote low tech side of things, although we do have a lot of technologies that we're building ourselves. We tend to focus more on the lifestyle side of longevity. And like you mentioned, 90% of your aging process, the pace at which you age, and by extension, your risk of different diseases of aging and your health span and lifespan are dictated by your lifestyle, and only 10% of that is genetic. And what I'd also say is that the genetic component comes into play more for the extremely long-lived people. So the centenarians or the super centenarians, the people living to 115, 120 years old, that is more genetic. But, and I wouldn't even say a majority genetic, it still isn't, but it is more genetic than for a typical person to be able to live to 90 or 100 and to do so in good health. That is almost completely based on lifestyle.
So let's talk about lifestyle. So, you're talking about eating, working out. You always hear you can't work out, you can't work out your eating, whatever that statement is. So let's talk about that. So what is the right lifestyle? You go on any social media platform, it says, well, Noom or Weight Watchers, Mediterranean, Pritikin, it's almost hard to figure out what the right one is, when it comes to eating, let's say, when we're talking about that. So, sure. Since most of, I think what you're talking about is our food is food. How do people decide?
Good question. Look at the scientific evidence, and the scientific evidence time and time again says that the Mediterranean diet is the healthiest diet for health span and lifespan. There are different diets with different goals. So for example, if you're a bodybuilder and you want to be anabolic, you don't necessarily want to follow the Mediterranean diet. Maybe you want one that's very high in animal proteins, and maybe it's lower on the vegetable side of things and so on. But that's not conducive to a long and healthy lifespan. Maybe you're vegan for very specific purposes, personal reasons why you're vegan. Maybe it's a morality topic. But with that said, it's not necessarily the best for longevity because you miss out on different nutrients that you only find in animal products, and you would have to supplement a very significant amount for that vegan diet to come close to the Mediterranean diet's performance. So overall, we first need to get past all of the fervor around different diets, and we need to define what the goal is, because different diets can achieve different things better than the other. Yeah. For lifespan, Mediterranean is the best. And you mentioned the Pritikin diet. There's actually a study that just came out this month that compares the Mediterranean diet to that diet and multiple other diets, 7 in total, I believe. And it looked at all-cause mortality and cardiovascular disease, death from it, as well as just heart attacks from it without death. And the Mediterranean diet beat out every single diet by a pretty significant margin for every one of those different markers. So And when you look at the longest lived people in the world in the blue zones, the 5 blue zones, they all eat diets that are either Mediterranean or they are very close cousins of Mediterranean, essentially the same
Yeah.
foundational elements.
I don't. I believe everything happens for a reason. There's no coincidences. I go to a holistic doctor and I get gout every once in a while. And I went to him yesterday and he said, "Oh, you're having a gout flare up. And so you need to eat foods low in purine." And so last night and all morning, I woke up early, like really early. The first thing I did is all I've been doing is researching the Mediterranean diet all day, because it said that it's a great diet if you get gout easily, or foods that you eat. And my body's so sensitive. So I've been researching it. Literally, I spent an hour this morning researching the Mediterranean diet and going to Chat GPT and saying, "Hey, map me out a eating schedule with a grocery list of the Mediterranean diet," because it's clean, it's not too much protein, it's this. So thank you for that. That just kind of reinforced that I'm going to focus more on this kind of low purine diet, which is doesn't put a lot of acid, right, and inflammation. It's less inflammation in your body.
Sure, definitely. And so to that point, I'm actually hosting a webinar next week, which we will post on YouTube as well for your viewers to be able to check out. So if they look for NOVOS nutrition webinar, they'll find it. I'll be talking a lot about the Mediterranean diet, but then I'll also talk about the NOVOS longevity diet, which is our tweaks to the Mediterranean diet based on research to make it that much more powerful. So there are small things that you can change that can go a long way.
Such as, give a couple of sneak peeks.
Well, one is that the Mediterranean diet has dairy in it. And there's a significant amount of research that finds that dairy consumption is not good for our health. One example is there was a study of 8-year-old boys who were given milk as their primary protein source. I believe it was about 54 grams of protein per day via milk or via meat. And they found that those boys turned insulin resistant even at 8 years old. And you can imagine that milk is something that animals stop consuming after their child phase, right? Humans are the only ones that continue to consume it afterwards. And it contributes to different growth pathways like mTOR and insulin-like growth factor. And these are associated with shorter lifespans. You can see people get more acne from it. Milk contains a molecule called galactose. It's something that our intestines break down to lactose, and galactose is then absorbed. And galactose is literally used in mouse studies to accelerate aging in the mice because it is an aging accelerant, and we're eating that in the dairy. So there are Mediterranean diets oftentimes have milk or fermented milks and cheeses and so on. And we recommend that you go for, say, a dairy-free version of a yogurt instead. That's one example. Another example is there's a lot of grains in the Mediterranean diet, and we would recommend replacing those grains and getting rid of things like breads and pasta with more vegetables, integrating more mushrooms, because mushrooms are tremendously healthy for you, and integrating more fermented foods as well, like sauerkraut or kimchi or natto and so on. So there's a few tweaks that kind of taking a little bit from different diets that are also found to be very healthy, like the Okinawan diet, for example, based in Japan. It's a blue zone. They have some elements that, say, the Greeks don't have, or the Sardinian Italians don't have. There are different elements that we can mix and match to have an even better diet, as well as research that has been done on longevity to realize that things like milk are not necessarily ideal.
Yeah. And I have a quick question. I agree with you. I read a book, and my kids are 17 and 20. So I read it when it had to be at least 15, 16 years ago. It was called Skinny Bastard. It was a series by 2 models. They wrote, I don't know if you read the book. There was Skinny Bitch for women, Skinny Bastard for men.
Oh, I've heard of Skinny Bitch. Yes. And it's a product line as well now. Yeah.
Yeah, so it was a book and it was all about food and foods that you should stay away from. One of the foods was if you stop eating dairy, your sinus infections will go away. A lot of the things that you're talking about. So we completely stopped eating dairy in my house, minus maybe Greek yogurts, a little bit of cheese here and there, because the kids liked it, but really got rid of 80-90%. And I used to get a sinus infection all the time. They 95% went away, and same with the kids. Yeah.
Yeah. Also, things like eczema are close, and acne are closely correlated with milk consumption. Now, I will say I do occasionally have some cheese as well. Like I like pizza, and it's not necessarily the best longevity food, but every so often I'll have it, and that has cheese. It's just about the dosage. I minimize it, like you're saying, and every so often I'll have some, and I tend to be fine. And for cheese, it's important to note, is like created through the fermentation process, in which most of the lactose disappears, and the galactose, by extension, a lot of that disappears. And so it's not as bad as having just glasses of milk, but it's still not quite as ideal as other types of calorie sources.
Yeah. It's interesting when you talk about grains. Do you incorporate like brown rice and couscous and quinoa in that as well?
Well, yes. So, for example, quinoa is a ingredient that we do support for the NOVOS longevity diet, but we look more to the nutrient value and the nutrient density of the food. So quinoa does have a lot of nutrients in it. It has a fair amount of vegetable-based proteins and amino acids. So quinoa is one that we do recommend, whereas something like say rice, white rice especially, but even brown rice doesn't have as many nutrients. Black rice or forbidden rice has more nutrients in it than either brown or white rice do. So it's really about trying to find that balance and get as much of the high nutrient density foods in your diet as you can. And even with the quinoa, if you had the choice between quinoa and Brussels sprouts and broccoli and spinach and so on, I would go with those vegetables before I would go with that quinoa.
Yeah. And what about people who are listening to this? Because you talked about, bodybuilders earlier and people who are just looking for some type of diet. When you're talking longevity, what type of protein shake because sometimes when you're working out, you're trying to get protein in. And if you're not trying to eat a lot of protein, like the Mediterranean diet, but then protein shakes, some are good. I think, I don't know. I talked to some holistic people. They say, don't ever drink a protein shake. And some are good, some are worse than others. What's good, what's not good?
So some of the considerations are the amino acids within the protein shake. And when you look at the most efficient of the proteins out there, they tend to be animal-based proteins. For example, whey protein is the most efficient of all of the protein shakes out there. It has the best lineup of amino acids, so to speak, for muscle building. But it also, animal proteins in particular, especially whey protein, is high in amino acid called methionine. And methionine can accelerate the aging process as well. Whereas vegetable proteins are lower in methionine. Now, vegetable protein on its own does not have a complete spectrum of the amino acids. So that's where you need to combine vegetable proteins together with one another. For example, rice protein and bean protein together contains all of the essential amino acids that you need, but either one of them on their own does not. Mm-hmm. So what you want to find is, ideally, if you have longevity in mind, you still want to get all of the amino acids you want, but you want to be lower on amino acids such as methionine. And so you can get that through a vegetarian or vegan blend of protein, which would be maybe like hemp protein and pea protein, or bean and rice protein, and so on. So getting one of these blends of those proteins is probably the best for the longevity-minded person. Otherwise, get it in whole foods. Yes, that would be ideal. But if you're working out and you want to have a high dosage of proteins post-workout, then sure, go ahead with a vegetarian blend protein.
Yeah. Talk to me about, as we're talking about longevity, and we'll get to your product, because I think your product's great. You sent me some and I've been taking it. So, I mean, I don't know if I can say I feel younger, but I feel great. So, and, there's always so much controversy on fruits, right? How, we're talking a lot about vegetables, but, there's so many people, and I've talked to a lot of nutritionists and et cetera. They say, don't eat fruit, eat minimal fruit, only eat fruit in the morning. only eat these fruits, berries are better, So, when we're talking longevity, I think people eat a lot of fruit thinking, hey, I'm eating a lot of fruit, I'm going to live forever. But there's so many different points of view on that. I'm just curious what you seem to be really well educated on all of this. So what's your thoughts?
Yeah, so let's start with what the concern is for fruit. The concern for fruit is that some of them are high in sugar. And in general, one of the guidelines for a healthy diet, in particular the Mediterranean or the NOVOS longevity diet, is to have low glycemic index foods. So in other words, foods that don't raise your blood glucose and don't raise your insulin, because both of those are damaging to our bodies for multiple reasons. So the question then turns into which fruits are going to raise your blood glucose the most. And then another question is, well, do fruits have benefits in the first place? And the answer is yes, fruits do have benefits. So you do want them in your diet, but which do you avoid? I would say, generally speaking, berries are among the healthiest because they are very dense with phytonutrients or specific plant-based compounds that have been researched to have a wide range of benefits for our health, especially for longevity. Everything from cognitive health and reduction of risk of different cognitive disorders like Alzheimer's and dementia, to stronger microbiome, reduction in oxidation within our bodies and inflammation in our bodies, and so on and so forth. So blueberries, blackberries, raspberries, strawberries, all of the berry family is very good. Lower sugar, very, very dense with nutrients. Citrus is also a healthy fruit family to consume. You get a lot of vitamin C and other forms of polyphenols from them. So oranges, lemons, limes, papaya, and so on.
Grapefruits.
Grapefruits, yes. Now, with grapefruit, the only thing is you need to be careful if you're taking prescription drugs, because grapefruits have an enzyme in it that can actually slow down the breakdown of that prescription drug and actually intensify the effects of it. It might, for example, you might take 200 milligrams of a drug, and by taking the grapefruit, I'm making up the number here, but it might be as if you took the equivalent of 300 milligrams of that drug, and it lasts longer in your bloodstream. So just be careful if you're on prescription drugs with grapefruit and the timing of it. That's the only thing I would say about grapefruit. And that's the exception. There aren't other fruits like that. And so just track, making sure that you're not having the fruits that are super high in sugar. Don't get the dried fruits. The dried fruits are very, very high in sugar. So like a whole mango is far healthier than a dried mango. And then the point you raised about like maybe having fruits in the morning, the rationale for that would be that we are more insulin sensitive in the morning. So what that means is that when you have sugar in your diet, your body, your pancreas secretes insulin to help to shuttle that sugar to your muscles. And if your muscles fill up, then it goes to your fat. Now, you want that to be very efficient. You don't want to have excess insulin in your body, because that can then cause insulin resistance, which leads to type 2 diabetes. So when it's early in the morning, your body is the most sensitive to insulin. So you need less insulin to shuttle that sugar to your muscles efficiently. Later at night, before bedtime, for example, you're not very insulin sensitive. And so having that same exact food can cause more damaging effects late at night than early in the morning. So as difficult as it might be, for example, if you were craving sweets and wanted like a dessert, you would be better off trying to have that dessert in the morning than having it at nighttime, though that's not always practical for people.
Yeah. Good. And then last, and then we'll get into your product, because we're talking about longevity and lifestyle. There's so many debates on protein, how much, if, you're talking about earlier, vegan is not the healthiest option, but then many will say too much protein is also not the option. You go to a Pritikin, they'll say to you, I think it's 3 ounces a couple times a week, so there's so many different, and then Atkins will tell you have, X amount of steaks a day. So, there's so much. So, what's from your studies and from a science standpoint, what should we know about protein?
Yeah. So protein, first of all, when you think of the Atkins diet is primarily focusing on weight loss. And so that they're not focused on long-term health outcomes and trying to extend lifespan. Though if you're obese, then weight loss is your number one priority, and maybe that is what's right for you at that time. Though, again, I would recommend the Mediterranean diet, which is kind of a balance. It's not overconsumption of protein. It's on the lower end of the middle scale of protein intake, and it's not super low in protein. The reason is that, as I mentioned before, certain amino acids like methionine can stimulate different growth pathways like mTOR. And mTOR, although good for growth, our bodies are in this constant state of growth because we're never feasting and fasting. We're always feasting in modern society, and we're always growing. Yeah. And that can actually lead to accelerated aging. It could lead to a higher incidence of cancer and a lot of other things going wrong. So that's where things like fasting come in, and intermittent fasting is because in those periods, you're in a period where you're not in growth mode, you're actually in maintenance mode, and you're cleaning up a lot of the cellular messes that have accumulated over time. So to your point about protein, that's part of the reason why you don't want to overdo the protein if your goal is longevity, but you don't want to underdo it either, because amino acids are the basic building blocks of our cells, of our organs. They're also they're signaling molecules. So these amino acids then can turn into different enzymes, and they can then signal to our bodies of what to do and what not to do. They produce neurotransmitters, which then lead to our mood, right? Like our ability to think, to concentrate, to feel good and optimistic, to sleep well. All of those require amino acids, which are the building blocks of protein. So you need adequate protein as well. So the guideline we give is that just do a simple equation based on your body weight, 0.6 grams of protein per pound, up to 0.72 grams of protein per pound if you're weightlifting, or if you're above 50 or 60 years old. The reason is that when you get older, sarcopenia sets in. That's basically the loss of muscle mass. It's one of the results of aging. And so having more protein along with some physical activity will help to maintain that muscle mass for longer. So you want a little bit more. And of course, if you're exercising, you want a little bit more because you're breaking down your muscles during exercise and you need to repair them. So you want a little bit more there too. Yeah. And studies have found that 0.72 grams is adequate for muscle building, and you don't need to go beyond that. If you go beyond it, the benefits to muscle growth are minimal. But then, of course, there's the risks of longevity issues if you go beyond that. So yeah. I think that that's a fair range.
What is it, your weight times 0.6, and that gives you yes. the number of grams.
Yes. So now, if you're, I'll just say, John, if you're massively overweight, you need to rethink all of that, right? Like, you want to have less caloric intake and so on. If you're 300 pounds, you don't want the equation to be 0.6 for you. But if you're moderately,
No. Yeah, I understand. But if you're also eating, 3 eggs and some Greek yogurt, that's part of protein.
Yeah, 3 eggs and Greek yogurt, that is protein. But that would be a relatively healthy meal. Ideally, maybe it's a non-dairy yogurt and those 3 eggs. So in that case, you're getting the protein from the eggs, you're getting the choline and other nutrients from eggs, from the yolks, which most people are deficient in choline, and it can lead to things like fatty liver. And then you're getting the fermented food from the non-dairy yogurt, and that would actually be a very healthy breakfast, for example.
Yeah. Okay. Is Greek yogurt non-dairy?
No. So Greek yogurt is typically dairy based. Now, there might be some non-dairy versions of Greek yogurt, because Greek yogurt is just the process, and it tends to be a thicker yogurt. Yeah. So there might be like coconut milk Greek yogurts that exist out there. I just don't know off the top of my head.
Yeah. You talk about fasting. I want to talk about fasting. I've watched some of the 60 Minutes on the Blue Zones and some of the people who are living in their 80s and 90s and beyond. They talk about fasting 1 day a week. And so you mentioned fasting a little bit and intermittent fasting. So what is, the NOVOS way of looking at fasting? Is it intermittent fasting? Is it fasting, on some type of cadence?
So first and foremost is to try to integrate the intermittent fasting. This is the easiest
Hold on, you broke up a little bit. All right, well, we're waiting for Chris to come back. This is so interesting. Oh, there we go. All right, now you're back. All right, good. All right,
Yes.
so we were talking fasting. You were saying, okay, yeah.
Yeah. So intermittent fasting, we would recommend people to get started with. The main reason is that it's the easiest to integrate into your life. And in the process, biological changes are taking place. Your metabolism is going from one that is most likely a carbohydrate fueled metabolism, one that you rely on those carbohydrates, to one where you're extending the period of time in which you're not eating, and your metabolism starts to shift to one of fatty acids. And if you go long enough, even ketones. Fatty acids are being derived from your fat stores, and most people want to lose some body fat. So that's a good thing in and of itself. But intermittent fasting would essentially be setting a condensed period in which you're eating, and a elongated period in which you're not eating. And a close relative to intermittent fasting is time restricted feeding, or time restricted eating, which is essentially setting the specific hours in which you will be eating. So we would recommend you do both of those. They both play into each other. So maybe you, for example, say, I will eat between 9 a.m. And 4 p.m. So that would be 7 hours of eating, and the remainder of the day you fast. And if you were to do that, you will probably experience improved sleep. You'll feel better. You'll lose some weight. And overall, it's healthier for you. Now, a lot of people, they fast for breakfast and they start in the late afternoon. And research shows that you tend to be better off fasting earlier in the day rather than later in the day. But it's still probably better to skip breakfast than to not have a time-restricted eating window in the first place. Now, to the topic of extended, prolonged fasts of 24 hours or longer, that's something that is dependent on the individual and their health. And this is something that you might want to speak to your medical doctor about first. Make sure that you have adequate body fat. If you're like super, super thin, low body fat, and you're already doing intermittent fasting, you're probably going too far with then doing a 48-hour or 72-hour fast because it's a stressor on the body. And you're already stressing the body by doing the intermittent fasting. You're probably exercising too. And so there is such thing as taking it too far. And so first, make sure that you're in a good place for it. And if you are, then yes, a 24-hour up to maybe a 72-hour fast can be healthy.
Okay. It's been fascinating. This is great. This is really great. So now I want to talk about how you got to, the product. I just want to remind everybody is novoslabs.com. And it is, why don't you tell everybody a little bit about what your products do? And then I want to go back to understand kind of how you got to this career, how you, and
Sure.
what drove you to do this. But let's kind of talk about Novos. Your tagline is great, younger for longer. So talk a little bit about what your products do and who your ideal clients are for those products.
Sure. So Novos as a company, we're a public benefit corporation. And so as part of that mission, we want to improve people's health span and lifespan, regardless of whether they purchase our products or not. And so as part of that mission, we have 3 legs to the company. One leg is formulations. And this is something that we work together with our team of longevity scientists at Harvard, MIT, and the Salk Institute. We have 6 officially on our scientific advisory board, but we work with more than 24 scientists and medical doctors to create our products, our patent pending products. So that's our formulations. The second leg is testing. We offer some free tests that you can use from home. It leverages AI. We also offer some surveys that can give you an idea of how healthy or unhealthy your lifestyle is. But then we also offer state-of-the-art biological age tests created by researchers at Columbia and Duke University, where it measures your pace of biological aging and your biological age, as opposed to your chronological age. Chronological age is obvious. Everyone knows how many years you've been alive, but biological age is how effectively old your cells and your organs are. And so that essentially tells you what your risk of disease, morbidity, and mortality are. And that is something that is malleable. You can control it. You can impact it through lifestyle. So it's good to set that standard to understand where you stand, and then to then integrate all of the advice we give, which is the third leg of the stool. That's knowledge. We have more than 125, 130 articles at this point written by PhDs and MDs who are specialists in longevity, all scientifically referenced, that give guidance and advice on all topics longevity. So those are the three aspects of NOVOS. The formulations themselves, the one we're most proud of is called NOVOS Core. This is a box of it, and it's a powdered drink mix. The reason it's a drink mix is because we have so many ingredients in here. It would take more than a dozen pills otherwise. So it's orange flavored and unflavored, two options. 0 calories. You tear it open, pour it in your water, and there's a dozen ingredients in here. About 7 grams of active ingredients. When you think of most supplements and pills, it's like 250 milligrams or 500 milligrams. We've got 7 grams in here, and we've done independent studies. All of the ingredients combined, there's more than 300 studies to support their inclusion based on longevity and health data. But we've done our own studies of the formulation, in vitro human cell studies, and we're also doing some clinical trials, and we did a case study. All of them have come back so far with really good results. The in vitro studies have found a very significant reduction in DNA damage from both irradiation and from chemotherapeutics to human cells. We've reduced senescent cells, which are like zombie cells that take place as part of aging, to the same degree as a prescription drug called rapamycin, which is considered the gold standard longevity prescription drug. And in the case study, 73% of participants had a reduction in their biological pace of aging, and 0% of people had an acceleration in their pace of aging. And the probability that this was a coincidence was 0.001, which means 1 in 1,000 chance that this is a coincidence, 999 out of 1,000 chance that this is based on the formulation. So we're really taking a methodical scientific approach to everything we do at the company. And even after we create the product, we don't settle there. We continue to research it and prove out the benefits.
It's great. It's great. I mean, everything sounds everything we've been talking about today, it sounds so simple, right? But it's so difficult in the execution, right? To buy the product and then actually take it every day, to buy the groceries or to hear about what you should eat and then actually go out and buy it, make it, and then hopefully eat it without getting bored with it, right?
Right.
And so there's this kind of, delayed gratification that we all need to reverse engineer so we can, live the best life we can today, but knowing that it has a compound effect of whether we live positively or negatively. And so what is your guidance and advice on how people can actually stop excuses and stop justifying and stop resisting and actually surrender to it and then live it with consistency?
It's a good question. I think, first of all, you have to consider personality types. So there's some people who are the all or none types. They need to make dramatic change to see anything, any difference in their life. And then there are other people who are a little bit more gradual. They want to take things by piecemeal and build up. I tend to be the type who likes to do all or none, and it just go 100% dive in.
Yeah.
And so what I would say is, though, that that certain areas, like, for example, diet that we've been emphasizing today on this call, that over time, you mentioned like getting tired of the foods. It's actually something very interesting that happens. Part of it's psychological, part of it's physiological. When you introduce new foods into your diet, and you do so for about a 3-week span, it suddenly turns into foods that you start craving. And part of that, like I said, is psychological. It's about habit formation, about 20 days or so to build a new habit if you're consistent with it. But if you're consistent with it, you're also reprogramming your microbiome. Think about the bacteria in your biome that might be craving and feeding off of sugar and candy that you're eating. When they're starving, when they're not fed the sugar and the candy, they start to secrete molecules, and through the gut-brain connection, start to cause the cravings. If you starve yourself of those, which requires willpower, but if you can do it for at least 3 weeks, a lot of those bacteria are now dying off. And now you're eating healthy things, let's just say vegetables and beans and some fruits. You're now feeding these other bacteria that are now growing in population and taking up more real estate in your gut. And now you start craving those types of foods because those bacteria want to be fed.
Yeah.
And it's this amazing thing that happens where after that, like roughly speaking, 21 day point, 3 weeks, you actually enjoy those foods a lot more than you thought you would have, and you're not really craving those other foods as much, as long as you have the psychological discipline not to fall into the trap of reintroducing those foods again.
Yeah.
There's each element of longevity, because we didn't talk about physical activity, which is
that was my next
important.
thing. Yeah. Let's talk about that.
I was gonna say then there's sleep and there's stress reduction. All of these things, right, play into it. They each have their elements. And which one?
Let's start off with physical activity and then talk about sleep.
Okay. So for physical activity, most people aren't doing enough of it. And then there are some people, myself included in my past, doing too much of it. So yes, you can over exercise. And if you're running, if you're a super marathoner, you're probably doing too much and you're causing excess inflammation in the body, and you're actually not extending lifespan. Conversely, if you're sitting on the couch all day long and you're not getting out and you're not exercising, you're obviously going to have worse cardiovascular outcomes, worse neurological outcomes, and so on. So a common question is, what is the minimum effective dose? Like, what's the least I need to do to get, say, 60, 70% of the benefits? And for that, it's basically about just under 25 minutes a day of brisk walking. And then ideally doing some sort of weightlifting activity 2 or 3 days a week, if you can. And that might even be as simple as like body weight squats, some push-ups, things that you can just easily do in your home, while watching TV. Maybe instead of sitting on the couch, you have to earn that seat on the couch and do 5 minutes of, squats and push-ups, and then you sit on the couch, right? So that I would say is the minimum. And so 25 minutes a day or so of brisk walking, I think all of us can find the time in the day to do that. If you then want to go beyond that, if you want to get to the 90th percentile, 95th percentile, that's where you're integrating other things like high intensity interval training 1 or 2 days per week. So that's when you're like sprinting as fast as you can for 20 seconds, let's say, and then resting a minute. And it's a very quick workout. You can get a HIIT workout done in 10 minutes or so, but it has the same benefits as doing steady state cardio, like a run or a bike ride or a swim. Over the course of an hour, you could do it in 10 minutes with HIIT. And then weightlifting. So weightlifting, typically 3 to 4 days per week is what's needed to be able to build and maintain muscle. So I personally, for example, will weightlift Monday, Wednesday, Friday. Earlier in my life, I used to weightlift 7 days a week, and that was probably excessive, right? So now I'm doing Monday, Wednesday, Friday. And then on Tuesdays, I'll go for a run. Thursdays, a bike ride. Saturdays, I'll go for a run. Sundays are my rest days, and that's when I'll just do long, slow walks or leisurely bike rides or something, and I'll recover during that day, and then I'll repeat.
All right, good. Let's talk about sleep. I know, Ariana Huffington, I've done a lot of reading on, a lot of the work that she does about the importance of sleep. Talk a little bit about that.
Sure. So sleep is incredibly important. And I think we all intuitively know this, but it's only recently that we've been doing a lot of research on sleep. And only a few years ago, we've discovered something called glymphatic fluid, not lymphatic fluid. All of us know about the lymph nodes and how lymphatic fluid helps to clear the cellular waste. Well, lymph nodes and glymphatic fluid is doing essentially the same thing, but for our brains. And when we sleep, it's secreted, and it's clearing out the neurons and the synapses and removing the waste products. It's actually interesting that you're cleaning out the opposite, the hemisphere of the brain that you're laying on. So, for example, if you're laying on the right side of your head, you're clearing out the right hemisphere of your brain. And if you then lay on the left side, you're clearing out the left side of your hemisphere of your brain. So there's probably an evolutionary physiological reason why we flip sides while we're sleeping. Now, if you don't sleep enough, your risk for cardiovascular disease, type 2 diabetes, Alzheimer's, dementia, Parkinson's all go up. And this is just the beginning of the research. We will probably find that other diseases are also coming as a consequence of inadequate sleep. Yeah. So sleep is very important. What I think we all also have experienced is how amazing we can feel after a good night of sleep, and how life is not nearly as vibrant and exciting after we're going multiple days without good sleep and we're feeling exhausted, right? Yeah. So I treat sleep as one of the highest priorities in my life, because I find I am more effective and efficient with my work, and I'll be that much more successful as a result of it. I'm that much more caring and loving and that much more nice to be around to my loved ones when I have a good night of sleep. And the opposite is true if I haven't been sleeping well. So there's so many reasons and benefits to having a good night of sleep, both in terms of health and success and relationships and so on. And relationships relate to longevity too. Relationships have been found to be a significant driver of lifespan and a reduction of risk of all-cause mortality if you have a strong social circle, a support network, and the magic number is 3 close friends that are, positive relationships. If you have 3 positive relationships, close friends, that goes a very long way for lifespan.
It's great. This is also fascinating. I love this and everything about all these topics. I love it. But I want to go back and talk about, Chris, how did, what were some of the mentors or the things that happened in your life that got you on this road to just learning about the art and the science of health and longevity?
Well, the very first instance in which I became interested in health was when I was 12 years old. I saw an issue of Men's Health magazine and I was inspired by it. And I was at that age where I was becoming attractive to girls and wanted to be attractive to them. And so I saw the guys in that magazine as being, the epitome of that. And I wanted to start exercising and getting in good shape. And fast forward only 4 years after that, I was in New York City on a school trip when I suddenly had a seizure, and it was the result of a brain tumor. And so I was rushed to the hospital, and fortunately, the golf ball sized tumor was removed, and I've survived to tell the story. But that really transformed my life in many different ways in terms of, asking existential questions when you're 16 years old is not very common. And it had a dramatic impact on me. And my interest in health evolved at that point from one that was admittedly purely superficial. I just wanted to look good and do well in sports, to one that became biologically driven, of wanting to avoid disease and to never be laying in a hospital bed contemplating my mortality. And that planted a seed that over the years manifested in different ways, in the sense of experimenting with different diets and supplements and exercise routines and reading and researching a lot and digging into my genetics and so on. But ultimately blossomed into starting NOVOS back in 2018. So it was about 5 years ago now that I began the process of networking with the scientists and bringing them onto the advisory board. And it's only been 2 years since we launched our product. It was a long period of research and development and laying the foundation.
Yeah. Well, I'm sorry you had to go through that, but I always love talking to people who had some type of turning point that led them down a path. And then, and now you're helping so many people. Like you said earlier, you have this product, whether you're making money from someone or not, you're at least educating somebody, and with your blogs and webinars and things of that nature. We have a mutual friend on LinkedIn. I asked you right before we went on, Johnny Immerman. I know Johnny Immerman because He's part of Immerman Angels, and I had testicular cancer 20 years ago. And, same thing. It's like when you get to those points in your life, you make different decisions faster to make sure that you're on the road to fulfillment, and you look at health a totally different way at that point. And one of the things that I always got from that is you have to be your own doctor. You have to be your own doctor in life. And so when I talk to people like you, I always am extracting kind of like, okay, what responsibility do I have now that I have this information? Now that I have it, what am I going to do with it? And now it's my responsibility. And so just to kind of go back there, as far as getting people on their first step in their launch, what are the very first steps to kind of, doing what we talked about today, which is so simple, it's complicated. And so how do you get people started?
Yeah, it's a great question. Well, one thing is that on our website, we have a longevity quiz that asks a whole bunch of questions about your longevity lifestyle, and it will give you a score at the end of it. We're also in the process of building this out even further, where we will highlight the red zones, the yellow and the green. So the green is what you're doing great, and the red is what you need the most improvement on, and yellow is something that you can prioritize after you get through all of the red. And we'll give recommendations for each of these. And so I would recommend that someone consider doing something like this. It's essentially an assessment of your lifestyle, and it's ranked in terms of importance as well. And so figuring out what is the most important, and maybe also what you think you're most capable of succeeding with. You need to consider both because success breeds more success, right? So find something that you think you can handle that is also important for you to handle, and try to succeed at that first. And once you do that, you'll start to build some momentum. And with that momentum, you can then start checking off other boxes. It's a process. It's a journey. It's not something that you're going to figure out overnight and fix overnight. We literally call it a longevity journey because it's a lifetime journey of learning, education, and improving. And we're doing it ourselves every day. We're coming across different scientific papers that shape our thinking about longevity. And this process is going to continue for as long as we're around. So I would say that's the first thing to do. Another thing, of course, I
just want to say one thing real quickly.
Yeah.
Is the beginning part of longevity is long, right? I never really thought about it, but it's, so it's a long term, it's a long road commitment. It's not, shortevity, I guess. It's longevity.
Right. Yeah. And what's important for people to realize is that when you focus on longevity, what you're essentially doing is you're focusing on these hallmarks of aging, the biological causes of aging, for which there are 12. And when you do so, you're not only improving your long-term health outlook, you're improving your short-term health as well, right? So these biological causes of aging will also, in the short term, lead to poor health. Things like poor concentration, low energy levels, increase in facial aging and the rate at which your face ages. All of these things are happening right here, right now. And by addressing the underlying causes of aging, you're actually making yourself healthier today.
Yeah.
And that's what's oftentimes lost when hearing longevity. People are like, well, I'll deal with that in 20, 30 years. Well, what if I told you that by dealing with it today, you're actually going to improve your today and your tomorrow and the years ahead?
Yeah.
That's important to realize.
It's great. Talk about your ideal client and, where they can buy your products and which products they should start with.
So anyone starting from late 20s, I mean, we start aging pretty much at puberty. And but in terms of like where it starts to pick up and that exponential curve begins, it's the late 20s, and your risk of death is relatively low there. But every 7 years, your risk of death doubles. And so we tend to find some customers beginning in their late 20s, and I think that that's a good time, but definitely by early to mid 30s, and then all the way up until your very last day, right? So the earlier you start, the bigger impact you can make. But even if you start late, you're going to feel the benefits that much more dramatically because your health is not quite what it was when you were younger. So you're going to see the difference even sooner.
Yeah.
So as long as somebody is motivated, they care about their health, they love life, and they want to be here for as long as they can for themselves and for their loved ones, then they are an ideal client of ours. And they can find out more at novoslabs.com. They go to novoslabs.com/blog. They can learn everything I was sharing before. You can also check out the evidence page where it shows all of the scientific evidence for our formulations. You can check out the approach page, which talks about how we created the formulation. And then I have a personal blog called slowmyage.com, which talks about my biological age results, my physiological health results, and all of which are that of someone in their mid-20s. And I'm almost 40 years old. And the laboratory that has run the tests has said that I have among the best results that they have ever seen. And I only say that as a point to say that I basically follow what you see on that NOVOS website, and I expect others will be able to achieve similar or even better results than I have if they follow those guidelines that we share.
It's great. This has been great, Chris. Quick speed round. Book that's had the biggest impact on you.
There was a period in which I had a failed venture. I was depressed, and I had to change my perspective a lot on life. And there's a book given to me by someone named Jiddu Krishnamurti, who is a spiritualist that basically got me to question everything in my life, and in a good way. Like, why do I feel the way I do? Why do I see the world the way I do? And it was like peeling back an onion, and it really got me closer to the core of who I actually am, closer to my truth, so to speak.
And what was the book?
It was actually a few books, and he didn't author them. They were actually just his speeches that were written out. But if you're familiar with the book, what is it? About living in the present moment.
Power of Now.
The Power of Now.
Yeah.
That book was actually largely based on Jiddu Krishnamurti's work. So he's credited in that book as being one of two people that was the most influential on that book being created.
Wow.
Which is also another great book, The Power of Now.
Yeah, it's great. I would love it. All right. And best piece of wisdom you've ever received?
Oh, my God. I would say create the life that you want to live, right? Like, don't have a victim mindset, or don't have a mindset of things are going to be given to you, like an entitled mindset. Have one of whatever you want for yourself in your life. Work as hard as you can to actually bring it to be.
Great. It's great. This was great. I really appreciate you, Chris. I know we were going to do like a 20-minute interview, but this was great. I loved all the content. I think community. I'm a business coach. I work with solopreneurs to Fortune companies and everything in between. I'm on a mission to help 1 billion people over my lifetime get unstuck. And those are my clients, people who are successful but stuck, and I get them unstuck. And I have hundreds of clients all over the globe. And I love this podcast because I get to bring guests on that can help you get unstuck. Without our health, we are nothing, right? We can come up with the best business ideas, but and implement and have great companies and grow, startups and grow $1 million and $1 billion companies. But without our health, we really don't have anything. And you've had a health scare. I've had a health scare. I know that, way too close. And I've had people die in my family way too young. And we must take control of our health. We must. And so I think, this was great for anybody who needs this to listen to it again. I never re-listened to my podcast. I've done like 1,500. I don't think I've ever re-listened to a full one before, but I am this one. This was great, filled with such great content. I appreciate your insights, Chris. Think community, control what you can control. We can control a lot of what Chris talked about today. And you can reach him and see his products at novoslabs.com. Or what was the other one about your age?
Slowmyage.com.
Slowmyage.com. And you can reach me at johndwoskin.com. Appreciate everybody coming in. Chris, any last thoughts?
I would just echo what you're saying, that your health can help you with your business, and then having your health can help you enjoy the successes of your business. So
Yeah,
health is first and foremost.
great. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks, Chris.
Thank you, John.